Is this an example of the legal system run amok? A jury, not a judge, a jury in Los Angeles ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $8.3 million in damages to a patient over a defective hip. The jury said J&J was negligent, that they were negligent in the design of the hip. Judge Napolitano is here. By the way, there are 10,000 more lawsuits of exactly the same nature coming. Okay?
Well, that wouldn't surprise me, because you know that these manufacturers of medical devices are prime targets for plaintiffs' lawyers. Yeah, and once they hit in one of them, that sometimes causes the manufacturer to settle many others that they wouldn't ordinarily settle in order to avoid the cost of the lawsuit.
This kind of thing drives me crazy.
And rightly so.
Do you really think that a jury is in a position to decide whether the design of an artificial hip was good or bad?
Well, that gets back to American history, because the Constitution guarantees a jury trial. So here's how it works. The plaintiff's lawyers bring in experts, designers and physicians, and they give their opinion as to why this thing was improperly designed. The manufacturer brings in its experts, and they give their opinion as to why it was improperly designed. And a lay jury is supposed to decide which expert they believe. That's been the system in America for 200 years.
It's not working. It is
well,
not
it results.
working.
It results in places like California and New Jersey, our home state, having notorious biases towards plaintiffs. The jurors are biased towards the plaintiff. The law is biased towards the plaintiff. The articulation of the law by the judge is biased towards the plaintiff. You get these huge verdicts, and who pays for it?
We do.
Everybody. Insurance premiums goes up. The cost of doing business goes up. It goes up for everybody all over the country, even though plaintiffs are hitting, so to speak, with these $8 million verdicts in places like Southern California and New Jersey.
And there is every incentive for the lawyers to sue, because they will get 30% of anything they can take off J&J plus expenses.
Yes.
Of that
$8.3
million.
You're actually being modest when you say 30%, because in some states it's more. In some states it's whatever the lawyers can negotiate for. Like in New York, in New Jersey, there's a cap on what the lawyers can earn, and the more they earn, the lower the percentage goes.
Why isn't tort reform, real tort, why is that not part of Obamacare? Because if you want to get the cost of medical services down, you get rid of the lawyers.
Well, one of the reasons tort reform is not part of Obamacare is because the tort system in America is not a national system. It's 50 state systems, 51 if you count the District of Columbia, and it's different in every state. It's not regulated by the feds. It's regulated by the legislature and the courts.
And the trial lawyers are the principal contributors.
And let me tell you
President
where they
Obama.
have their influence, in the state legislatures. That's why in Texas, it's no longer a plaintiff's state, because the trial lawyers lost influence there, and the laws have swung over towards a more centered equilibrium. But in places like New Jersey and California, trial lawyers have inordinate influence with the legislature and with the courts, because trial lawyers become judges.
But the people in Texas will still have to pay the much higher prices for artificial hips.
Yes, because that's a national market. Exactly. So they may save themselves local expense, but they don't save themselves on the cost of purchasing a nationally produced product.
Would you be prepared to agree with me that this is an example of the American legal system run riot, and it needs control?
Well, I don't know that I would say run riot, but it's an example of this happening in localities. Yes, this would not happen in other parts of the country the way it's happened in Los Angeles or in New Jersey. Yes. And I would agree with you that the consequences of this are not thought through by the judges and the jurors and even the legislatures that permit it to happen. Because they themselves are paying for it without realizing it.
Look, some poor person who has been injured by this will limp into court, look absolutely terrible in front of the jury, and the case is lost.
Well, some injuries are serious and legitimate injuries. I mean,
of course they are. I'm not suggesting they're not.
These people are entitled to compensation.
But a defective design, a jury is equipped to make that decision?
You know,
I just don't believe this.
We decided in this country 230 years ago it's better to have juries decide that than judges. I'm smiling because I know you don't want to get into the decisions that happened 230 years ago and what propelled those decisions.
It's just that
we don't want them to go there, Stuart.
You always go back to that. You always go back to that. You always accuse me of not understanding the American system.
No, I don't accuse you of that. I'm just suggesting you may not want to get into the historical impulses for those.
Can I ask you real quick,
decisions.
Judge, on that note, there's been a lot of talk of professional juries, and people who would understand the design, professionals, not attached to anyone, who could actually make a more intelligent decision on stuff like this.
Well, that would require an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and in some states, the state constitution. In our home state of New Jersey, it is the state constitution that guarantees you a jury, as well as the federal constitution.
Well, aren't lawyers investigated by their own?
Yes.
Well, why aren't doctors and drug companies investigated by their own?
Well, in a sense, they are, because sometimes the court can appoint a doctor to advise the court and the jury as to what how the medicine actually played out. Because when an expert is hired by the plaintiff, that expert's going to say what the plaintiff is paying the doctor to say. And when an expert is hired by the defense, that expert's going to say what the defense has paid them to say. And the jury has to decide who they believe. It's almost a swearing match between expert witnesses. Which expert witness presented the more attractive, the more credible case? That's what it sometimes comes down to.
The American legal system is not equipped to deal with medical disputes, period.
In some cases, it gets carried away, like this one that we're talking about, without knowing the facts in the case.
We all pay for it.
No dispute that we all pay for it, and no dispute that the jurors are not permitted to take that into account, that we all pay for it. In fact, in New Jersey, you can't even use the word insurance policy in the courtroom.
Really?
Yes.
Great.